Welcome to Heartwork, a project that's focused on advancing women in leadership. We are here at a very, very critical time. We have come through a global pandemic. We're still going through a labor crisis movement. Some call it the she session. At one point, it was the lowest participation of women in the labor force. Heartwork is about responding to the call, responding to the plea for change, for equity, for inclusion. But it needs to go beyond just the data and the numbers. Here at Conscious Economics, we've assembled an incredible group of thought leaders that have been on the front lines of this movement for a very long time, representing intersectional women from across the Canadian labor market. What we're about to embark on in this film is a storytelling exercise of hearing from what it really feels like, not only to lead the organizations that are doing this work, but to work within corporate institutions that may still have a ways to go when it comes to building a system that works for everyone. So here we go, embarking on this storytelling journey, deep listening exercises, and asking you at home to reflect on how these themes show up for you. Whether you identify as a woman in the labor force yourself, or whether you're someone that supports one, we need you right now to be a part of this movement. Welcome to Heartwork. We invite you to listen to the stories of those that we've gathered across the country around this important message. We hope for you to join the movement, listen, and be moved.
If you can introduce yourself to all of our participants and tell us a little bit about your work and who you are.
Absolutely. So my name is Sheena Denise.
My name is Shireen Salti.
My name is Cecile Albaba.
Klassisch Caroline Hilton. Heshgwak supsish uklas wakatushko atsa My name is Caroline Hilton.
So my name is Agapi Gassessin.
My name is Rhiannon Roseland.
I'm here on behalf of UN Women.
The work that I've been doing with a collective of folks is really to decolonize mental health and spirituality for Black folks, particularly, and extending that out to Indigenous folks, people of color. And then, of course, inviting really all communities to understand what it is to support, people of color, and particularly, women as well, in being able to guide themselves to wherever their next steps are and to find resilience and wellness in the ways that serve them the best.
My work is shaping meaning of what Indigenous inclusion in economy means and how that is essential to our future as humanity and what an Indigenous worldview to economy looks like today.
The Canadian Arab Institute is a national nonpartisan organization that's really focused on the interests and issues of the 1 million Arabs in Canada through research, policy, and community engagement. So we're the only organization in the country that really tries to advocate for Arab Canadians at the federal level of government and in Canadian media, of course.
I come from a decade in the corporate world, spending it on Bay Street as a financial planner. And in working in that environment, it was very evident that the financial planning field was approached from the technical, practical pieces of looking into the relationship we have with money. And I really wanted to explore this conversation from a different lens. So I went back to school to study psychotherapy and combined both disciplinary fields to become a financial therapist.
I work on a project called the Women's Empowerment Principles, and it's basically a set of 7 principles supporting businesses on how to support women and achieve gender equality in the workplace, but also the marketplace and community. And so it's kind of a holistic approach to encouraging businesses to support women, and we really ensure that we have an intersectional lens when we're doing all of our work, because we know that women are not a homogenous group, and so it's important to support women in all of their diversity.
So we do workforce development essentially. Like there's 3 pillars to the organization, but one being programming. So we work with young people who are furthest from the labor market, and we really start to think about the unemployment rate for Black youth is 2 times worse than the national average. How can we get Black youth from the back of the unemployment line to the front of the unemployment line? Sometimes the middle, like they might end up in the middle, but the reality is, how can we get them closer to starting a career that will provide for them high-paying jobs with upward mobility?
I spent the last decade as the president and CEO of the Economic Club of Canada, which is the country's national podium of record for thought leaders and economists and politicians and corporate leaders to talk about important issues impacting the economy. So I've definitely been at the forefront of some of these conversations around equity, around inclusion, around how to create a more sustainable workforce. In this role, we created Conscious Economics, which is what brings us all here today.
So in regards to the corporate world, there's many challenges, but in your experience,
what do you think the major challenges are that are facing women that are trying to navigate those more corporate spaces?
There's so many. I think access to leadership roles, equal pay, family-friendly policies, and parental leave. And the tricky bit is, I think that these aren't siloed. They all kind of fit into one another. And so by just addressing one, you're not addressing the other layers as well.
I think confidence is the main thing. Intertwined with the confidence, right, is the ability to be seen and valued for bringing non-traditional aspects of any kind of role into an organization. And so that's really intuition and creativity.
Having the creative space for personal leadership in your skilled capacity, the space for that, the expression of that is essential. Without experiencing that in the corporate environment creates restrictions, limitations, and unfilled capacity, particularly from a female perspective.
When we're tying it back into confidence, I think a lot of women don't feel heard or valued to be able to step into roles of leadership.
Really, we're not understood and we're not heard. Our systems have not been designed for us. And what I mean by that is women still are the ones that are traditionally taking on the majority of household responsibilities. Women are the ones that physically bear children. And then we're also expected to step into corporate spaces and act as though none of those things exist. Now we're in a sandwich generation where we have aging population, and that falls on women as well. So the truth is that I think underlying the biggest issue for us is our well-being and our health. I think that our tanks are empty, and the pace of work and all of the different pieces that are coming at us that expect us to show up faster, stronger, better, are just starting to wear down. And during the pandemic, women bore the brunt of all of this. It was the industries that women were leading that were the hardest hit, but also all of the other load in terms of childcare and other responsibilities were falling on women.
But I think ultimately what it boils down to is non-inclusive corporate cultures, because these are the things that are, for example, holding women back from leadership roles, but they're also the things that are making women leave from leadership roles. And a non-inclusive culture is so pervasive, and so it's important to really tackle that when you're also tackling all the other angles.
I spoke with a lot of women during these focus group discussions that we held about the barriers they face kind of entering the corporate sector, but also barriers faced in the corporate sector. And funny enough, these challenges are the same. Whether you're in or outside, you still feel like you're on the outside, inside. That kind of was the biggest kind of aha moment, these feelings of alienation in the corporate sector for Arab women, that they don't belong, that they in fact are not Canadian enough for the system. And many Arab women were told that they didn't have enough Canadian experience, or that they didn't know enough Canadian folks to understand how, the culture works in that corporate sector, or how training goes in these rooms, or how feedback is even communicated to them.
I think the biggest difficulty is that women are just seen as like one group. There's a lot of instances that I could say, oh, it's because I'm a woman, but it actually is just because I'm a Black person, right? So I need somebody to understand me as a Black person, accept me, understand the microaggression and the unconscious bias that they have as me as a Black woman. And then we can move on to me being a woman, because these are intersectional. Yes, there's what brings us together is the identity of being a woman, but the reality is there's a lot of layers to that.
There's a lot of code switching that happens when women do enter these spaces. So even though these spaces are welcoming to women, women don't feel necessarily comfortable to be women in these spaces. So there's a lot of times where you have to mask your emotion, where emotion is seen as a sign of weakness. And another challenge particularly is having to almost suppress the other areas in your life, your family needs, your life balance, and that's simply because it's perceived as if you lack ambition, or you lack the stamina or what it takes in order for you to advance in these particular positions. So a lot of women have a lot of guilt walking into work sometimes because of their inability to really look into their life and bring these issues forward in a way that's a conversation that they can have within the workplace. And I recall vividly this conversation that made me very uncomfortable earlier in my career when one of the senior leaders in my team said something along the lines that it was her in-laws that raised her kids, and if I was to be expected to move forward into and develop myself further in that environment, that I really have to make different family arrangements and not bring family into work. And that is a very major challenge that I feel a lot of women face.
Another thing that we found in our research, particularly as it relates to gender-based violence, was that the number one reason why Arab women don't leave abusive relationships is because of financial codependence, because of economic abuse. And so you have to really think these women that are now employed in the corporate sector are really making huge strides for their own families, huge strides for their own communities. And suddenly they're in this space where they don't feel welcome or they don't feel like they belong. And if they do feel like they belong, they're probably working 10 times harder than the average person or the average man in the room. Almost these feelings of, I'm not enough. I don't know if I got here because I got lucky. I don't know if I got here because it was essentially some Arab woman I spoke to were describing it as like the lottery ticket, that they got this job, that they were finally here, even though they have and experiencing these challenges. They're just grateful for the fact that they're here to begin with, because most Arab women that they know didn't even have these kind of opportunities.
And here we are now, and I think that there's conversations that we have to have. If we're going to be able to rebuild society, we have to make it work for women, and right now I really don't think it does.
I want to ask you about what your advice would be to the women that are watching this and all the women that are going to be. What's your piece of advice?
I think it's really important to acknowledge that your life experience and your skills actually are enough. I think a lot of times women are really, really hard on themselves, and we're always thinking about what we can do bigger, better, greater, right? Because that's what we're taught, to always be above the rest. And I think being kind to yourself and also acknowledging the skills and the attributes that you bring to the table, and knowing like, I am enough, I should be here, I actually should be owning this space, and not necessarily letting people sway you from that narrative, because it will actually tarnish your confidence to do what you need to do and be decisive when you need to be decisive. But it also gives power to a lie.
You are enough, and you did not certainly get here because of luck. You certainly got here by working hard.
And this sounds really cheesy, but believe in yourself. I feel like a lot of times I'll go into meetings and the first thing people say, and I think that they don't mean it maliciously, but they say, you might be experiencing imposter syndrome. Well, what if I wasn't? What if the other young woman wasn't either, right? But now you've kind of planted that seed. And so just believe in yourself and recognize your skills, and don't be afraid to share them.
I think probably the most important thing is to do what you can to feel better, to feel well, and to find the tools and techniques to support your wellness.
Paying attention to our internal state. Where are we in that at any time? So realizing if that's low, realizing the state of courage it takes to express who you are, what your capacity is, and to be able to support around a network that enhances your capacity.
You have to create space within your day, within your life, to really touch in with yourself, to really understand what you need. We don't serve anyone by running around with our sort of heads cut off, smashing more and more things into a 24-hour workday cycle. I think that our bodies are speaking to us. I think that we're tired. I think that our relationships and our, trajectory in our careers are suffering because we aren't taking the time and the space to really nurture our own well-being.
And when we think about wellness, it's not physical wellness, it's beyond that. It's the integrative wellness. How your mind is feeling, how you're thinking, how your emotions are being expressed. If you can express your emotions, where you have the spaces to do that, and folks that you have around you, your environments, My motto is, if you're not feeling well, you can't really do well. It's your internal joy and wellness and remembering how important that is, on the day to day.
The biggest advice is for other people to validate these feelings first and foremost, and surrounding yourself with a network of folks that really are experiencing the same challenges, and from other racialized communities as well, because we know our issue is not just an issue that is facing, Arab women alone.
I think first surrounding yourself with people who champion you and whose work you want to champion as well. I've always worked alongside really powerful women, one of who put me here today. And so that kind of creates a really inclusive culture that makes me want to do great work and makes me want to stay where I am. So look at the people that you have around you and make sure they're good, comforting people that you like.
If we could have a little visioning exercise here and imagine that some of these changes that we've been so desperate to see happen actually took place, what is your vision of the future of work? Like, what would that look like? What would it feel like? Paint the picture.
A big part of my vision is that we really reconnect with who we are, and by that is reconnecting to our emotion, reconnecting to our body, reconnecting to our identity, bringing who we are fully to work.
I would want to see people being able to show up to the work that they do with their whole self. I want people to be able to enter into a space, and even if it's something that's analytical, that they can bring creativity to it. And if it's creative, that you can bring like that strategic mindset to things. People being able to not feel afraid in their workplace to express things.
Stability, but also flexibility. And a lot of people think that those are mutually exclusive, but they're totally not. Just stable work, good equal pay, good benefits, a place where they know that they can thrive, their skills are valued, they can move up. But at the same time, and I think this has also been shown with the pandemic, is people value work-life balance. They value flexible hours. People have kids, they want to go elsewhere. Like, some sort of flexibility coupled with that stability makes the workplace a great place to be, somewhere where you feel secure, but where you know that they know that you care about time outside of work.
You know, how many family members are like asking people, when are you having kids? When are you getting married? Your job is not going to be like, is not going to cuddle you at night, etc. But like, why is it not possible for all of those things to happen simultaneously, right? And why can't we have a society where men support women just as much as we're meant to support them? When I think about that, I think about balance, and I think people think about balance differently. Some people think that balance is, I keep my work at home and I keep my family life and my private life here. And I actually think my hope for everyone, and even the young people that I work with, is that they're actually going to live out their purpose. So when you're living out your purpose day in and day out, there is no like compartmentalizing the two. Like, they kind of all blend together harmoniously. It's kind of like personal and professional have now intertwined, and we also have to acknowledge people as human beings.
I really want to see some deep system change, and one of the things that I know it makes me feel most empowered is being able to work more as a collective as opposed to the individual. In our Western society, we've had so much focus on the individual. It's the individual that's getting the pay raise. It's the individual that's responsible for, meeting these particular targets. And I think that as a woman, I work better when I get to collectively work towards those pieces. So even through transitional phases, like when women are re-entering the workforce after having children, being able to create a community of women within an organization that are all going through that experience so they can provide camaraderie and support. Being able to cluster hire for positions of leadership. So saying instead of one person, we'll hire 2 or 3, and those 2 or 3 can actually go through this together and support one another. I think that we know how to get a job done, but we also need to be able to color outside the lines to make things work for us.
I think work in the way that it could be the most successful is to cultivate an area and space of play. And when we think of play, it's going into spaces and encouraging others to express, to share their ideas, their dramatics, their laughter, their emotions in general, whether that's anger or frustration. So whether it's through food or art, spoken word, creativity in general, it can show up in so many ways. But being able to provide a container for employees to have a space where they can show up as their full selves, I think is most essential.
I believe that the future of work to me is one where we value the emotion and humanity in people, that we start to place people and the planet in the same threshold as we do profit, that we know that the well-being of all of those things can coexist, but women are the ones that will drive that. Women are the ones that traditionally think more about the impact on the collective community, on the future generations. And so being able to see that as a true tangible business skill, a compassionate heart is needed in the future of work more than anything.
I think it's one where women in all of their diversity are like meaningfully represented and included, of course.
Seeing other women that look like me in places of power in the corporate sector, in places of leadership, where they are now suddenly resonating with a lot more people. We have a term in the Arabic language called wasta. It's translated to connection in English, but it's really social capital. Social capital was a huge part of the integration successful journey that I had in Canada as a newcomer, as a first generation immigrant myself. And for me, when I think about that future of work, what that big vision looks like for all racialized women is them having that wall start in Canada. Or at least that's what I heard from most Arab women doing those focus group discussions, is that we don't have the Canadian experience or just to be in that senior role. Even though I was in a senior role back home, I don't have that Canadian experience. So ensuring that the future of work also includes those women, racialized women that have diverse experiences internationally, globally, and embracing that.
And I think that's kind of my hope and wish, is that people see each other for who they actually are, not like the demographic that they are a part of, and also understand that when we talk about D&I and diversity and inclusion and, you know, having women, all of those things, that nobody needs to lose. Like, people have this understanding that, like, when we include everybody, that somebody loses out. And I think that's my biggest hope, I would say, is that I really want people to understand that it actually includes everyone. It includes white men. It includes, you know, Black men, white women, brown women. Like, it actually includes all of us, and all of us being able to sit at the same table and share from the same plate and everyone be full. And I think that's my biggest wish for corporate Canada in particular, that we start to really understand that, because there are no losers when you bring your entire self.
What are the feminine qualities or the qualities that women possess that could actually support corporate Canada to improve but are being repressed right now?
I draw on my experience of sitting on the Canadian Economic Growth Council. The council was made up of 7 women and 7 men for a gender equality perspective. And the task of the council was essentially to look at the modernization of the Canadian economy and to build that from the perspective of middle-class Canada. As the council worked to create and shape recommendations, women on the council began to describe a story of the experience of that, the relationality to families and to citizens in very tangible ways, where the men's narrative was strongly focused on the metrics or the mechanics. To be able to understand the functionality from a female perspective, the experience in human, family, citizen terms, as well as the mechanics of that, that is essentially a balance in perspective. And that is also directly reflected back into the balance that needs to return to corporate Canada itself.
There's an extension of sight that I think women have in particular, that's being able to see all aspects, all sides of a situation and provide in the way that women do, being able to bring those ideas and aspects into organizations, which I think traditionally have been very patriarchal or hierarchical. There needs to be more understanding in that sense.
Not to generalize, obviously, we all embody a different spectrum of these qualities, but emotional intelligence is not something that has been deeply valued. Although now we're in a situation where we're in crisis, really, we have a mental health crisis amongst our labor force, and we need leadership and people who understand their own emotions, how to process them, and how to teach other folks to do the same, because it really will make work easier.
I definitely think compassion. I think that that's often linked to weakness in our mindset and in our culture. Anytime I've worked for someone who's super compassionate, and I've only worked with people who are really compassionate, it makes my work so much easier. I know that I feel valued. I know that they value me. They value my time, my work. They remember things about me. I want to come to work. So those are great qualities.
I think creativity is being deeply, deeply repressed within corporate Canada. We don't have to be painting a picture to be creative. We can be creative in the way that we design workflows and schedules, teams, even accounting can be a creative endeavor, but creativity's been deeply suppressed.
I'll start by saying there isn't one Arab woman that I know that isn't strong, that isn't resilient, right? And I think that's a quality that is often seen as too much in that Canadian corporate world, is don't be too Arab, don't be too pushy, don't be too much for the current audience that we're here right now. And that's hard for us because we're authentic. We want to be able to speak our mind. We want to be able to empathize with others and collaborate. And the only way we can do that is by showing our strength and is by pushing people to grow.
I think also just a desire for belonging and connection and community has been repressed. I think we've been, especially in the corporate world, it's these silos. There's all this jargon and language, all of it to sort of take away from what feels familiar and what feels authentic and connected.
But I think in general, no matter what quality a woman has, because not every woman has the same qualities, no matter what she has, not stigmatizing it. So if a woman is super hard, super strict, not calling it bossy, saying, wow, she's super proactive, she's getting the job done. And if she's super compassionate, that's great too. And it's not a sign of weakness. So any quality, not stigmatized.
The last question is really around this idea of allyship. What do you think men can do to support this movement towards a more equitable economy?
First, recognizing that the movement is for them. Particularly the feminist movement is for everyone, and everyone has a responsibility within it. So recognizing that gender equality and women's empowerment is also your responsibility.
When we think about, allyship, it's really about being able to see someone, experiencing someone, one, reaching out to them to say like, hey, I saw this. How did that affect you? This is how it affected me. Is there something that I can do? And even if, that conversation doesn't happen, maybe, starting a conversation on their own volition to say, this is what I see, and this is what I see could be changing and how we could be better supporting women. I think we need to be careful of waiting to be asked. And so I think men could really be stepping up in recognizing and without having to be corralled into action, that they could be taking action on themselves. And speaking up and saying, hey, I think we could be doing things in a different way.
Encourage us to speak up. If those men can just really say, what do you think? What do you think? And I'm not going to talk more after you tell me what you think. I'm just going to let you tell me what you think. I think that's key. I think often there were lots of men, for example, that would repeat the same things that I said. And it would just sound much better. It was exactly the same thing I said, right? So if just letting women have that last word, even if it's in a meeting or even if it's in front of a partner, letting women become those decision makers and allowing them to thrive in the workplace.
I think I'll use the example of Emmanuel Mullis, who is the ED of an organization called the Network for the Advancement of Black Communities. Since I was a young person, he's always made space for me. Even if we're in meetings, he's like the godfather, of it all. And like people love him and everyone wants to hear from him. But he always makes sure that he includes me, makes sure he's saying, we're leading this together. If someone's not asking me my opinion, he'll stop and say, well, before I give you my opinion, like, what are you thinking, Agapi? Like, what's your thought process? So he really does step back and provide room for me to lead and be a leader, and acknowledges my leadership any chance that he can. And I think that's a perfect example of like mentorship, but also a man understanding that sometimes they take up space.
The creation of space for women leadership must come from inside. It's a personal choice. It's a choice within our conversations, and it's a choice within our corporate responses.
Self-reflecting, I know it's uncomfortable, but it's important to look at your own biases, your own actions, the jokes you laugh at, the conversations you engage in, meaningfully reflect and say, oh, maybe that wasn't that great. I could do better next time.
I just think that men have to also do their own work to really reflect and see where they're perpetuating stigma and biases towards women. And it's not an easy thing to admit where we're making mistakes or where we're doing something that we may not want to do, but we're unconscious to it. So men being able to step into a situation where they can step into that more compassionate heart space, where they can start to learn how to process their emotions as well, can actually lead to a healthier environment for everyone.
Calling out the people around you. And it doesn't need to be a big thing, just hey, that wasn't a great joke. It perpetuated this. We can do something else next time.
And also to championing women that they think could be stepping forward and leading and are inspiring them and sharing how they've been inspired by women.
My invitation is to really start embracing a woman's strength. We see each other as competition. We're constantly going to be up against that wall. And when we start really stepping back and looking at how we integrate our strengths, then we leverage each other's strength and build on it. So my invitation to men is to truly start making space for that, to feel inspired by the next strong woman they meet instead of being threatened by it.
The role for men right now is to actually tap into the emotional intelligence and the creativity within themselves. If they can start to experience themselves how those things change the way that they show up, they may be able to value those traits more deeply in others.
And to truly make space for that also for women outside their professional lives, like to empower their sisters, to empower their girlfriends and partners, to empower their mothers and aunts and all the women in their lives. And when you start really thinking about the women around you and honoring these women, then naturally it's going to seep into the women you meet at work. And that's going to be something that naturally comes out to you instead of something you feel is forced to meet a diversity and inclusion agenda.